I've been talking about how 2025 is this year of all of these profound changes. And we've noticed some of them. Change isn't always glaring and it doesn't always show up unexpectedly. Sometimes it can be very slow and it can come in the form of energetic shift on a day to day basis. If you've noticed, and if you haven't, look over the last handful of weeks in your experience where you've probably been getting a lot of information downloaded to you. Sometimes you have to pay attention in order to understand that it's information coming through. But if you spent time with family or you've had different conversations with people, you've been able to shift your perspective about some of the things in the news, or even just being able to self reflect. All of these things in very subtle ways have been delivering you more necessary information that you then hopefully use to assimilate and work towards what the mission and purpose is now. You've heard me say so many times that this autopilot way of approaching human life on this planet really is coming to an end, where it's no longer about these milestones that we were taught to look for. We get married, we buy a house, we age, we blah, blah, blah. It's now more about looking at these different versions of who we've been, what we learned while we were those versions, and then what we're taking from that and applying it moving forward. Because it's almost like this is not just one life. This is the culmination of many, many, many lives. And even if you split those lives into decades or into 5-year increments, or even just eras in your life, where you look back and you think, wow, that was the era where I was going out and hanging out with friends and I was carefree and I was just working some menial job because I didn't need a bunch of money and responsibility. Or that was the era when I was a new parent. I was suddenly hit with all these responsibilities and I lost my sense of self. Or that was the era when I was making so much money and working so hard, but I wasn't really happy. Think about all of the eras in your life as if they have been different lives, right? So now we're in a brand new life post COVID, post the past. It's almost as if we are now in this totally new timeline or new timelines if you're experiencing things the way that I am. And this is one of those weeks where we forge very quickly and strongly into that timeline. So we're going to talk about it. This is the Path Ahead, my astrology forecast of the week. I am Nafa Perkins. I released a great shadow talk, the Gemini shadow, which is on YouTube and on Star Narratives, the podcast. So you should check that out because it's always good to understand your mind, especially when we're talking about these deeper subjects of timeline jumping or new life, or how our old selves, our past lives, are impacting this current life moving forward. Because it takes some mental gymnastics to be able to make that work. That's one of the issues with what's happening right now is our brains are trying to keep up. We're still trying to operate from that old way of doing things where there's this belief that we're on some linear timeline. We are born, we do all these milestones, and then we die. Because really what we're starting to see and conceptualize is it's not even just a spiral. It's like multiple spirals all the time that we're on. And we're jumping around, we're going back, we're going forward. And the more self-awareness that we have, the more of our center that we have, which also looks like our connection to our higher self, which is our connection to higher power or our spiritual connection, which is our connection to our physicality and our mental, emotional state, our awareness. It all falls under the umbrella. And there's many different versions of it. It's nothing that is black and white, but it all falls under this umbrella of our inner landscape, knowing of our inner self. And if you don't know your inner self, then you're basically out there just spinning or you are in reactivity. So if you think about a slice of the population and lives of survival, and a lot of these people are very out of touch with their inner self. They are maybe addicted to drugs and alcohol, which is a way to very quickly lose touch with your inner self, or they have mental illness, or they're just reactionary, right? Totally unconscious and just rolling through, just doing the next thing that needs to be done, being reactive, getting angry, feeling wronged, feeling exhausted. So we all know on some level what that feels like. And if you're listening to this, you've probably also had moments of consciousness where you're right there with yourself and you're able to witness your experience and say, ooh, well, that person was a jerk, but it doesn't mean that I have to be reactive and yell and scream or demand something from them. Right. Or, oh boy, I'm in a bad mood. I'm so sad and depressed, but it doesn't mean that I have to make my sadness and depression somebody else's problem. So you've heard me talk a lot about impact and being aware of our impact on others, not because we're trying to caretake them and say, oh, I want to show up and be the nicest, sweetest version of myself so that everybody's happy. But when we are aware of how we impact people, it speaks to this level of presence that we have, where we understand if I've snapped and said something and I have hurt your feelings, it's really on me to recognize that and do something to repair it. Hey, sorry, I snapped at you. As opposed to your old way, which was I snapped at you because I was annoyed and life goes on. Get over it. Because that speaks to a not being conscious. So this being conscious becomes even more important as we progress through 2025. There's so much going on. And without that sense of presence, without that internal grounding, or that ability to see ourselves, see what's really happening. Why am I having this reaction? Why did that person trigger me? Then how are we supposed to navigate this really heavy stuff? We disempower ourselves when we put it all on a government to fix something or make us feel better, or a person to come and make us feel better. This is all about being so steady, so grounded, so rooted that we can't be pushed, right? Imagine it's that tree that is old and rooted, and the wind comes and blows and it's fine. Maybe a little movement, but like the tree's not falling over. And that's what we're working to become. It's about this practice of being rooted so that you aren't thrown off course when things that are outside of you happen, because that's what we contracted to come here to do, is to grow. And we grow through being blown around. But if we fall down every time a big wind comes up, then we're in trouble. If you've ever been in a yoga class, it's like, be rooted, pay attention to your breath, be very self-aware of your container and even of your pain and suffering. When we're in a pose that hurts, it's about breathing through. It's not about collapsing or crying or yelling at the teacher, like, why did you have us in that pose for so long? No, it's about doing the internal work to be able to tolerate the discomfort, because on the other side of that discomfort is wealth, knowledge, a knowingness, a rootedness, and really stamina, ability to go through anything. So that said, if you like my style and you would like to work with me, you can find me at electraastrology.com. I also have a free Astrology as a Superpower ebook that you can get on the front page of my website. A lot of really cool ways to work with me. And I say we jump into the charts. By the way, I just opened enrollment for my third season by season astrology workshop. I have been doing these when the sun moves into cardinal signs, at the solstices and the equinoxes. And we do have a summer solstice coming up in the northern hemisphere. So this one is called the Portal of Possibility, and you can register. I'll put the link below to register. It's free. It's my gift to you, and it's a way that we can create a very specific energetic container with everybody that shows up. This isn't a public offering. It is free to anybody that wishes to sign up, that is contained within this specific container, where we're going to go into the energy of the next 3 months, do some work around it, going to help you get some clarity so that you know how to continue to build that center in a really personal and unique way for you. So you can sign up either on the website, electraastrology.com, or you can just sign up at the link below. So we begin on the 9th. I talked last week in my Path Ahead forecast about Venus moving into Taurus, which signifies really the end of the work of this last Venus retrograde, which also relates to the Venus retrograde from 2017. So you can make some connections of what was happening in 2017 as it related to your finances or your love life. And then what just happened over this summer. And now Venus has moved out of the sign of Aries and into the sign of Taurus, which is great. However, she has to immediately make a square to Pluto. So this is always tricky because Venus and Pluto, they don't do that well together. Pluto rules Scorpio, which is the sign that is the opposite, or we should say at detriment for Venus. So when Venus and Pluto meet, here we're taking all of our baggage about our money, our finances, our love life, and then we are pulling up the lack mentality that usually goes along with those things, right? Scorpio Taurus, as I talked about in my astrology for awakening, we talked about that being the financial axis and how Venus is where we are abundant naturally. And Scorpio is where we feel, I don't have enough. I have to wait on somebody else to give me my money. I'm powerless. So you might bump up against some powerlessness this week around this square, but Pluto is transformative, right? And so Pluto does remind you, especially in the sign of Aquarius, that there's power in community, even though Venus and Taurus says, well, I can do it myself. So Pluto in Aquarius says there might be people out there that could help you, or some of your issues might just straight up be relational and not financial at all. Or maybe you have some things to look at in terms of revolutionizing something, whether it's your money or your relationship. So this can show up in a lot of different ways. Just know it's really going to feel uncomfortable. But this is a little bit of an uncomfortable week anyway. That's okay. We have our center. We are holding it. We also see that Neptune has hit the 2nd degree of Aries as of this week. So we have never seen Neptune at the 2nd degree of Aries, not in our lifetime. And when I looked up the Sabian symbol for 2 degrees of Aries, I'm just going to read what it wrote. Median entertaining the group. And it goes on to elaborate to say, this symbol reflects the power of humor, charisma, and performance to engage and influence others. Okay. So when we're talking about the role of the performer to engage and influence others, and we're also in the middle of Gemini season. My last astrology for awakening with the Gemini shadow, I did talk a lot about how we influence others. We can put on this performance to get other people to think what we think. And there's so much of that, right? I mean, that's very much social media. It's very much the mainstream media. And then it's also just part of how we relate to other people. We want to make an impact, right? I talked about impact, being aware of our impact. And so there's a difference between being aware of our impact and wanting to make an impact, right? Wanting to make an impact says, well, I want to influence you for the better. I want you to think the way that I think, and I want you to see things the way that I see them. And not only do we then feel that there's a camaraderie between us, but we can also feel safe because we know that we're in agreement. I see a lot of performance in the political arena, a lot of performance, obviously, in social media. And so this is just a reminder for you because this is Neptune, right? So Neptune is the ruler of things like illusion. What's an illusion? Are you watching a movie? Is this person or this team or this group just doing a performance, right? How all of these corporations step on board and they suddenly become pro LGBTQ. Is that just a performance? Is that a way that they're trying to sell more merchandise? Who's performing in your life? Who do you need to just question a little bit deeper? What is it? And then, of course, who do you perform for? And when we look at Mars over here in Leo, and Mars is gearing up to make some connections with Chiron and with Uranus, that we want to be performing in the most authentic way. We don't want to be putting on an act so that people like us or putting on an act so that we feel safe and we feel a part of the group. And that is part of our Pluto in Aquarius mission over the next 20 years. Well, it's in this sign is really looking at the power of the group, the dysfunctional power of the group, because we are also trying to find our own voice with all of this Saturn, Neptune in Aries. It's so important that we aren't just blindly following whatever the performer on stage is doing. Think about a performer on stage who says, everybody clap your hands, and then the whole audience claps. Everybody repeat after me. Whole audience repeats. Well, that's great. as long as we're understanding, like, this is the show. But as soon as I step out of the theater, if somebody says, hey, clap your hands, it doesn't mean that I have to clap my hands. On June 10th, we have Jupiter entering Cancer. All right. Well, Jupiter hasn't been in Cancer for about 12 years. So you can look back to 12 years ago. That would have been 2013. What's interesting about this is that Jupiter has just spent about a year in Gemini, which is its detriment position. So it doesn't like to be in Gemini because Gemini is about the facts and Gemini is like smaller knowledge. And Jupiter is big knowledge, not so much fact driven, but perspective driven. So Jupiter hasn't had a lot of fun in Gemini. There's been a lot of stuff that we've been trying to figure out, or even conflict between, well, this is the facts, but wait, that doesn't make sense. So think about that in your own experience, the conflict of beliefs that you might have been pushed against. So you've probably had some scenarios where you've thought, well, yeah, I like this belief system. I believe in this. I will go for this. And then something happens and there's a bit of a fall from grace, right? It's like going to a church that you love and you're listening to the pastor and they're talking about things that you agree with and it feels really good and it feels really enlightening. And then they drop some comment that is filled with judgment and, ooh, that doesn't feel good to me. So then how do I reconcile what I loved with what I hate? As Jupiter moves into Cancer, where it is exalted, it loves to be in Cancer because Jupiter has so many moons and Cancer is the sign that's ruled by the moon. So there's a lot of emotion here. There's an expansion of emotion. We're getting out of trying to wrap our minds around all of this heady information. And, you hear me talk about how you have to be aware that feelings aren't always accurate. Feelings bring you a lot of really good information, but they can be totally based on cycles, meaning your mood could be better when the sun is out. It could be worse when it's raining. It could be better when you're ovulating and worse when you're menstruating. It can be better when it's the springtime and the sun comes out and worse when it's the wintertime and you have seasonal affective disorder, right? So our emotions, we have to take with a grain of salt that they are cyclical, but they do bring us information. So Jupiter is bringing us information, and it's especially relevant because Jupiter is going to pretty quickly square with Saturn and Neptune. And these are the cardinal signs. So we talked about Saturn and Neptune being in Aries, which is about me and my needs and what drives me and my boundaries and my identity, what I feel passionate about, what fills me with a sense of purpose, or what fills me with a direct yes or a clean no. And our emotions have a lot to say about that, right? Our emotions really can help us to understand what our boundaries are and help us to know what we feel passionate about. However, we have to have discernment, right? And remember, Jupiter can blow everything out of proportion. So you want to watch out for emotional reactivity. And on June 11th, we build straight into this full moon in Sag at 20 degrees. So this is the axis, Sag and Gemini, the axis of the mind, the axis of perception in the place of Sun in Gemini, and perspective with Moon in Sag. And the Moon and the Sun, our internal king and queen, also our heart of hearts, the Sun, and our deeply felt emotions, the Moon. We are working with who am I? What do I perceive? And what do I feel? And how does that shift my perspective? So these are some pretty big themes. We also know that this Sun and this Moon are in a square to the node. So there's a lot about leaving behind something. In this case, leaving behind our need for approval with South Node Gemini, with South Node Virgo, and moving toward that spiritual relaxation, that remembering, like, we don't actually have to figure it out. It's not all about putting our mind to work to come to the conclusion. You got to relax. Because at the same time, we are also watching Mars making a trine to Chiron. So Mars being in Leo, again, that's our desire to move forward and be the most exalted, vibrant version of self. But the wounding with Chiron and Aries around our identity. But there's something special happening. This is a trine. These two are getting along. Look this week too for as your mind begins to release the need to know. And you move a little bit deeper into the remembering of who you actually are. Or maybe it's more of like the exploration of who you actually are. Know that there's some room to heal some of the old wounds, some of those situations from childhood where it wasn't okay to be you. It wasn't okay to have boundaries. It wasn't okay to be big and loud and vibrant. So there's a lot stirring this week. We're also watching the sun come into a direct square with the nodes, the self exploration. And again, coming back into that inner world, that version of you that is the witness, that is both the higher self and the inner child that can hold the entire kingdom. Because remember, we have the advisor in the form of Saturn. We have the king, we have the queen, we have the messenger in the form of Mercury. We have the divine feminine goddess in the form of Venus. We have our masculine warrior with Mars. We have all of these archetypes that are held within us. And ideally, we want a really healthy kingdom. We don't want any of these archetypes to be too strong or too weak. We want everybody to really work with one another and get along like a real power team. And developing self-awareness is part of developing that power team. If you have ever been on a board or the leader of a group or you've been teaching a class, you know the importance of holding the kind of space so that everybody is not arguing with each other all the time, so that everybody is engaged enough to make things happen without having apathy, without having attrition, and without having a bunch of inner conflict. So that's part of what we really set a goal for this week with the sun squaring the nodes. This is the halfway point between the eclipse season, is that we want to say, how is my kingdom functioning? How is everything? Am I overreactive? Am I too wounded? Am I too aggressive? Am I not receptive enough? Right? So we're looking at some real big self-witnessing this week as one of the most important things you can do. On Saturday, we're watching the moon come in and make a conjunction to Pluto. Pluto has its fingers in this real feminine, receptive energy that we all hold, making square with Venus and then making a conjunction with the moon. So know that Pluto is here to really teach you something. And because these are both feminine principles, probably has to do with your receptivity. So a lot of times when I'm doing readings with people and they have abundance blocks, one of the things that we start to look at is what blocks the abundance. And very often there are themes around feeling like I had to do it all. It wasn't safe to be abundant. If I was abundant, people were jealous of me. Or if I was abundant, suddenly a big bill showed up or somebody came and took my abundance away, right? Which is Scorpio stuff. And so we carry these things with us. I have to do it all. When it comes to the moon, I'm trying to take care of everybody. I couldn't possibly slow down and let somebody take care of me. That feels too dangerous, or their care might come with strings attached. So this is also a potent week to look at your money story. What is underneath your ability to receive, or your ability to actually go out and get your rightful chunk of abundance without feeling guilty about it, without worrying someone's going to steal it from you or that someone is going to be jealous of you and make you pay for it. These are deep themes. This isn't the kind of stuff that you just snap your fingers and you're healed, but certainly opening up the conversation in your own brain can be a real game changer. On the 15th, we have Jupiter making this exact square to Saturn. So mythologically, there was conflict between Jupiter and Saturn, which I won't go into because this is already going long. But we can say astrologically that the conflict is that Saturn represents control, structure, stability, and tradition. And Jupiter represents new, freedom, liberation, and the ability to change minds, change perspectives. So you can see that these two automatically don't do very well together. And then Cancer and Aries are two signs that have conflict because Aries is the warrior and Cancer is the mother. So that can give you a sense of some of the internal conflict that you might be experiencing when you're working with this energy, which is the part of you that wants things to stay the same or that is looking at your life through the lens of tradition. Like, I went to college and I got this degree and I spent a bunch of money on this degree. And now I have to find a job that uses this degree or else. Right. And we all have those places where we get really rigid in how we think it should be. But Jupiter says you have to change it up. You have to be able to step back from what you thought was true and see it differently. Jupiter, as a ruler of Sagittarius, is all about traveling the world and reading different philosophies and different things that help you to change your mind. So that might come up. And then finally, we see this square between Mars and Uranus. And although they don't have the same mythological difficulty that Jupiter and Saturn have, they are very different energetically. Aries is the god of war. So there's a lot around brute force and moving into action and instinctual action. Whereas Uranus is much more disruption or liberation. Uranus is also relating to the people or the collective. It's a relational energy. And Mars is much more about me and how I need to fight my way through. So we're looking at the energies of Taurus as well. So that is abundance, money, finances, and Leo, which is me and who I am and my ego. So you might notice this kind of goes along with all of this financial stuff as we have been dealing with all this Venus stuff for months, where people are freaked out about their money, of course. And we're looking at the ego and what the ego has to tell you about money and the truth of the abundance and how to get it and your own power over abundance, which is Taurus. And then we're bringing in Mars, the god of war that wants what it wants, and Uranus, the god of liberation, the god of revolution. Uranus brings in a lot of change and disruption, but it usually leaves us better off than when we found it. And that is something that my friend astrologer Lisa Salvatore has talked about. We did a podcast interview years ago, and she was the one that said that Uranus leaves you better than when it found you. And I've always really liked that because change is so hard, especially when we're talking about Taurus, which is the most fixed of the zodiac signs. Change is hard. We are change adverse. And when sudden disruptive change happens, it can send us spinning. But when we know that it's happening and it's going to leave us better, there's some peace in that and even a little bit of excitement like, oh, okay. So my relationship to money, to abundance, to what I have and lack is going to undergo some changes. I might have to go through a few ego deaths to get there. I might have to reevaluate my whole relationship with how things are supposed to look, which is what we're doing with Saturn, especially Saturn in square to Jupiter. I thought it was supposed to look this way. I was taught that this is what success meant. This is how much money I need in order to feel safe and secure. Oh my God, my mind is blown. Everything is changing in front of me, which is the nature of 2025 in totality. But we know I'm fine. I'm able to change my mind. I'm excited about actually changing my perspective. I am interested in looking at things through a different lens and finding more peace and solace in all of this change. And I have this steady center core that I can rely on, that I am cultivating daily. I have stamina. I know how to breathe, and I know how to hold my center, even when life is chaotic around me. More of us that can do that, the better, because then we act as way showers for others. It ripple effects out. So this is not just about you. This is about you being here to help grid the planet in a positive way. This is you making change, okay? In a time when we all keep saying we want change. All right, I hope this was helpful. I will talk to you all soon.